You've probably heard the story of the Exodus. I mean, it's one of the most foundational stories ever told. But what if I told you it's not just a story about liberation? What if it's really a story about a divine war, a full-blown spiritual showdown between the god of a nation of slaves and the entire pantheon of gods worshipped by the ancient world's greatest superpower? And that brings us to the central question, the real problem at the heart of the story. See, in ancient Egypt, Pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was considered a god on earth, the living, breathing embodiment of the empire's power. So, how do you fight that? Seriously, how do you defeat a living god? Well, the answer, amazingly, doesn't start in a palace or on a battlefield. It starts on the backside of a desert. It starts with a fugitive shepherd and a sight so bizarre it would literally change the course of human history. Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story picks up with Moses. It's been 40 years since he fled Egypt, and he's living this quiet, unassuming life as a shepherd. His past as an Egyptian prince? That's a distant memory. He's just a guy out in the middle of nowhere tending his flock. Until one day, well, everything changes. He guides his flock out to Mount Horeb, which the text calls the mountain of God. And that's when he sees it, something totally impossible. A bush completely engulfed in flames, but it isn't burning up. It's just on fire. It's a paradox, right? A physical impossibility designed to do one thing, get his attention and pull him in. And then a voice comes from that burning bush, and with that voice comes a mission that sounds frankly insane. Go back to Egypt, the empire you're a wanted fugitive in, walk right up to the most powerful man on the planet, and tell him to let your people go. I mean, for a lone shepherd, that's not just a big ask, it's an impossible command. And Moses' reaction is just so incredibly human. It isn't some burst of heroic confidence. No, it's pure doubt. It's fear. It's the reaction of a man who fully understands the insane scale of what he's just been asked to do. His immediate response is basically, who? Me? He says, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh? And you get it, right? He's not a general. He's not a diplomat. He's a shepherd on the run who supposedly has a stutter, and he's being tasked with facing down a living god. Who is he to do any of this? So, to overcome this massive self-doubt, he's given proof, 3 divine signs to act as his credentials. First, his shepherd's staff, the symbol of his humble life, turns into a serpent. Then, his own hand becomes leprous and is instantly healed. And finally, he's given a promise. The water of the Nile itself will turn to blood. These aren't just parlor tricks. They're his marching orders for the war to come. But before that battle really kicks off, we kind of need to understand the stakes. The whole story hinges on the Israelites' bondage. But there's a huge question that has puzzled scholars for ages. How long were they actually enslaved? The number at the very center of this debate is 430. The Bible says the Israelites' sojourn was 430 years. But what does that sojourn actually cover? Well, the answer completely depends on which ancient version of the text you're reading. And here's the heart of the debate. The Masoretic text, which is the basis for most modern Bible translations, says they lived in Egypt for 430 years. Simple enough. But the Septuagint, which is an older Greek translation, adds a tiny, crucial phrase, and the land of Canaan. And that little addition, well, it changes everything. Now, why does that matter? Well, take a look at the genealogy. From Levi, who was one of the brothers who first went down into Egypt, to Moses, who led the Exodus, there are only 4 generations. For those 4 generations to stretch across 430 years, it would require some insanely long lifespans, even for the Bible. The math just doesn't quite add up. This is where the historian Josephus steps in and basically cracks the code for us. He clarifies that the 430-year clock didn't start when the Israelites got to Egypt. It started way back when their ancestor Abraham first entered Canaan. So this splits the time perfectly, 215 years in Canaan and 215 years in Egypt. Not only does this solve the whole genealogy problem, but it also lines up perfectly with that older Septuagint text. Okay, so with that context set, we finally arrive at the main event. And this is where the story shifts from a plea for freedom into an all-out spiritual war. The 10 plagues, they weren't just random natural disasters. They were a systematic, targeted takedown of the Egyptian gods, one by one. This verse right here sets the stage perfectly. God tells Moses, "See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh."
This elevates the conflict entirely. It's not just a messenger talking to a king anymore. This is God versus God. So the very first confrontation is just dripping with symbolism. Aaron throws down his staff, it becomes a serpent, and then it swallows the serpents conjured by the Egyptian magicians. Now you have to know, the cobra was the symbol of divine protection for the king of Egypt. This act was a bold declaration right from the start. Your protector is powerless against him. So the first plague goes right for the heart of Egypt, the Nile River. The Nile was basically a god itself, personified as Hapi. And Hapi wasn't just a god of water, he represented life, fertility, prosperity, everything. Egypt quite literally was the Nile. So the first plague is a direct assault on Hapi. The source of all Egyptian life is turned into a river of death and blood. The very thing they worshipped as a blessing becomes this horrifying curse. The message couldn't be clearer. Your god of life cannot stop death. The next attack targets Heket, the frog-headed goddess of fertility. Now, you gotta remember, frogs were a good thing in Egypt. Millions of them would appear after the Nile flooded each year, so they were seen as this powerful symbol of new life and abundance, a really positive sign. And you can see the strategy here, right? It's brilliant. Take that symbol of fertility and twist it into a disgusting pestilence. Instead of a promise of new life, the frogs become an instrument of absolute chaos, swarming everywhere, getting into everything, dying, and poisoning the land. The goddess Heket is shown to be a source of filth, not life. This pattern just keeps going, escalating until it's a direct assault on the most powerful god in the entire Egyptian pantheon, Ra, the sun god. For 3 days, a terrifying, tangible darkness covers all of Egypt. And listen to how Josephus describes it. It wasn't just an absence of light. He says it was a thick, suffocating air that brought terror and death, as if people were literally being swallowed by a dark cloud. But the final blow, this one was the most personal and by far the most devastating. This wasn't an attack on a nature god. This was an attack on the future of Egypt itself and on Pharaoh's own claim to divinity. The death of the firstborn son in every Egyptian family, from the lowest servant all the way up to Pharaoh's own son, his divine heir. This is the plague that finally breaks him. And with that, the war is over. The gods of Egypt have been systematically dismantled and silenced. Pharaoh's will is shattered. And what follows is this frantic, chaotic, triumphant escape into the great unknown. In a single night, centuries of bondage are just over. The Israelites are practically thrown out of Egypt. And when Pharaoh predictably changes his mind and pursues them, his legendary army is completely swallowed by the sea. The war is truly won, and as this newly freed nation steps into the harsh wilderness, they find they aren't alone. They're led by a massive pillar of cloud for shade during the day and a pillar of fire for warmth and light at night, a constant, visible sign that the God who defeated an entire pantheon was now guiding them home. Which brings us to our final question, and it's a big one. Was the Exodus a literal historical event, exactly as it's written? Or was it a profound theological statement, a powerful declaration that the true measure of a god isn't found in giant monuments or golden idols, but in the power to set the captive free? Maybe, in the end, it's impossible to separate the two.